Right before I stepped onto the graduation stage, my phone buzzed. Dad texted, "Do not expect help. You will be begging me soon." He smirked from the front row, entirely unaware I was already a billionaire tech CEO. Have you ever had a moment where someone you loved tried to break you exactly when you were supposed to shine? Let me know in the comments, because what I did next changed everything. I am Silas, 26 years old, and I was standing in the suffocating, poorly lit concrete staging tunnel beneath the university auditorium. The air down there was thick, smelling of old dust, nervous sweat, and the cheap synthetic fabric of 300 rented graduation gowns. My collar was scratching the back of my neck. All around me, my classmates were practically vibrating with anxiety. They were whispering about their crippling student loans, their entry-level job interviews, and the terrifying reality of stepping out into a brutal economy with nothing but a piece of paper. They were frantically texting their parents, looking for a shred of reassurance. I was not doing any of that. I was standing perfectly still in the shadows, letting the damp chill of the cinder block walls seep into my bones. Up in the massive, brilliantly lit auditorium, thousands of proud families were taking their seats. My family was out there too. I had personally orchestrated their entire weekend, paying for their first-class flights and their luxury hotel suites in silence. I wanted them in the very front row. I needed them to have a perfect, unobstructed view of the stage. My father, Alaric, was sitting dead center. He is a man built out of diesel fumes, grease, and immovable arrogance. He runs a massive regional freight and logistics empire. Beside him sat my mother, Corinne, wearing her usual expensive pearls and that vacant, polite smile she always used to mask the toxicity radiating from her husband. I watched them on the live feed monitor mounted on the tunnel wall. The camera was slowly panning across the VIP section. That is when I saw my father pull his heavy smartphone from his suit pocket. He looked annoyed, as if attending his youngest son's graduation was a massive waste of his valuable time. He typed something out with his thick, callous thumbs, hit send, and then slowly looked up. He found the camera lens feeding the live monitor, and he smiled. It was not a smile of pride. It was a predatory, vicious smirk. It was the look of a man who thought he had just permanently crushed an insect under his heavy steel toe boot. A second later, my phone vibrated against my thigh. I pulled it out, the harsh blue light stinging my tired eyes in the dim tunnel. I read the words 3 times just to make sure my mind was not playing tricks on me. Do not expect help. You will be begging me soon. He thought he was delivering the final, fatal blow. He thought he was locking me out in the cold, severing my lifeline at the exact moment I was supposed to be stepping into the real world. He wanted me to walk across that stage feeling utterly worthless, terrified, and financially destitute. He wanted to watch me bleed out in public, desperate for his approval and his money. The student standing next to me, a guy from the mechanical engineering department, bumped my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I did not flinch. I did not drop my phone. I did not shed a single tear. Over the past 8 years, I had built a psychological fortress inside my mind so impenetrable that a pathetic text message from a bitter old man could not even scratch the paint. I looked at the monitor again. Alaric was still wearing that arrogant smirk, soaking in his perceived victory. But there was a massive, world-shattering reality he did not know about. A reality that was currently ticking down like a financial time bomb in the other pocket of my slacks. I reached down and brushed my fingers against my second phone, my encrypted corporate device, the device that held access to my bank accounts, my board of directors, and the final SEC filings for a tech company I had built from absolute zero. I was not a broke college student begging for scraps. I was already the CEO of a unicorn tech startup, and the market was about to open. Alaric thought he was cutting me off, but he was actually just locking himself out of the biggest empire our family name would ever see. Before I reveal exactly how I wiped that smug look off his face in front of thousands of people, we need to go back. We need to go back to the diesel fumes and the stolen money to understand exactly why I let him dig his own grave. Growing up in my household meant learning one unbreakable rule very early on. If you could not hit a thing with a hammer, if it did not bleed oil or haul heavy freight across state lines, it was utterly worthless. Alaric built his trucking and logistics company from the ground up, and he worshipped physical labor with a terrifying religious intensity. He came home every night smelling of grease and cheap cigars, shouting into his phone about union disputes, shipping manifests, and broken axles. To him, the world was made of steel, rubber, and concrete. Anything else was a pathetic illusion. I was born into this environment like an alien dropping onto the wrong planet. I hated the deafening roar of the heavy machinery. I hated the toxic masculinity that coded every single interaction in our house. While my older brother Theron was out in the dirt, learning how to rebuild heavy diesel engines and screaming at warehouse workers, I was in my room writing complex lines of code. I saw the beauty in invisible systems. I understood that the future of logistics was not about yelling louder or buying bigger trucks. It was about algorithmic efficiency, route optimization, and artificial intelligence. I tried to explain this to my father once when I was 12. He laughed so hard he choked on his scotch, patted my head, and told me to go play my little video games while the men handled the real business. Theron was the undisputed golden child. He was loud, aggressively confident, and possessed my father's exact explosive temper. Alaric looked at Theron and saw a perfect mirror image of his own ruthless youth. Because of this, Theron was handed the keys to the kingdom. By the time he was 20, he was given the title of Director of Operations, a massive corner office, and a company credit card with no limit. The fact that Theron was functionally incompetent at managing spreadsheets did not matter. He could yell at drivers and look intimidating in a hard hat, which was all my father cared about. My mother, Corinne, perfected the art of strategic blindness. She hovered in the background of our massive suburban house, pouring wine and changing the subject whenever Alaric went on a tirade. She protected Theron fiercely, making endless excuses for his reckless behavior. Whenever Theron wrecked a company vehicle or offended a major client, Corinne would smooth it over, whispering that he was just under a lot of stress. But when I won a state-level coding competition and asked them to come to the award ceremony, she vaguely muttered that they had a very busy weekend at the country club. The defining fracture in our family, the moment the Cold War turned hot, happened when I was 17. It was a miserable, raining Tuesday night. I woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of shouting downstairs. I crept out of my room and looked over the mahogany banister. 2 police officers were standing in our grand foyer. Theron was sitting on the stairs, his expensive shirt torn, smelling heavily of alcohol, staring at the marble floor. He had driven his brand new sports car straight through the storefront of a local business while heavily intoxicated. It was a massive, catastrophic mess. There was immense property damage, potential jail time, and a public relations nightmare looming over my father's pristine company image. I watched from the shadows as Alaric paced the floor like a caged animal, writing massive checks, calling his army of expensive lawyers, bribing anyone who would take the money to keep the incident out of the local papers. He threw cash at the problem until it magically disappeared. Theron never saw the inside of a jail cell. He never even lost his driver's license. But 2 months later, I logged into the online banking portal to check the status of my college savings account. The account I had been depositing my own meager summer job earnings into, alongside the funds my grandfather had supposedly set aside for my education. The balance stared back at me in harsh red digital numbers. 0.00. I felt the blood drain from my face. I printed the statement and marched directly into my father's home office. I slammed the paper onto his heavy desk, demanding to know where my future went. Alaric barely looked up from his shipping manifests. He took a slow drag from his cigar, exhaled a thick cloud of toxic gray smoke, and looked at me with profound boredom. He told me the legal fees and the quiet settlements for Theron's little accident were incredibly expensive. He told me the company was facing a cash flow issue that quarter, so they had to liquidate a few minor assets. My college fund was one of those minor assets. When I started yelling, demanding my money back, asking how I was supposed to pay for my university tuition, his face hardened into a mask of pure contempt. Theron is going to take over the family legacy, he growled, pointing a thick finger at my chest. He builds real things. He moves real cargo. You just sit in your dark room and play on screens. You do not need a fancy university degree to do whatever useless tech hobby you are obsessed with. If you want to be useful, I will give you a job in the warehouse sweeping floors. Otherwise, figure it out yourself. Corinne stood in the doorway, staring at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with me. She was actively choosing the family business over my future. That night, I realized the horrifying truth. To them, I was not a son. I was an expendable resource, a battery they could drain to power Theron's failures. I walked back to my room, the rage burning hot and bright in my chest, and I swore to myself that I would build something so massive, so undeniable, that it would eventually block out their son. Despite the stolen funds, I fought my way into a top-tier engineering program through sheer academic grit and a mountain of terrifying student loans. I was drowning in debt before I even stepped foot on campus, but I used that panic as fuel. By the time I turned 18, I had spent thousands of hours in isolation, writing the foundational code for an artificial intelligence platform I called Aeropath. I knew my father's industry better than he thought I did. I had grown up listening to him scream about profit margins, delayed shipments, and the agonizing cost of inefficient routing. Aeropath was designed to eliminate all of that. It was a machine learning algorithm that could predict weather patterns, traffic congestion, and vehicle maintenance needs, dynamically rerouting heavy freight fleets in real time. It could save a mid-sized logistics company millions of dollars in a single fiscal year. The math was flawless. The code was elegant. I printed a 30-page business plan on heavy stock paper, bound it professionally, and took a bus back to my hometown. I was terrified, my palms sweating against the leather binder. I still harbored this pathetic, lingering hope that if I could just prove my worth in his language, the language of profit and efficiency, he would finally see me. I did not want a handout. I wanted a seed investment of exactly $50,000 in exchange for a 20% equity stake in my new company. 50 grand was pocket change to him. It was less than what he spent on landscaping for the corporate headquarters. I walked into his massive corner office at the freight depot. The walls were covered in framed photos of huge trucks and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. He was sitting behind his desk, reviewing contracts. Theron was lounging on a leather sofa in the corner, playing a game on his phone, entirely ignoring the actual work he was being paid to do. I sat down across from Alaric, took a deep breath, and set the heavy binder on his desk. I pitched my heart out. I explained the gaping vulnerabilities in the traditional logistics model. I showed him the precise revenue projections. I explained how Aeropath could seamlessly integrate with his existing dispatch systems and cut his fuel costs by 12% in the first quarter alone. I spoke with passion, clarity, and undeniable logic. Alaric did not open the binder. He did not read a single sentence of the executive summary. He simply stared at me, his eyes dead and unreadable. When I finally stopped talking, the silence in the office was deafening. Theron let out a loud, mocking snort from the sofa. "Look at the little nerd trying to sound like a businessman." Theron sneered, tossing his phone aside. "What are you going to do, hack the trucks? Make them fly?" I ignored my brother, keeping my eyes locked on my father. Alaric sighed deeply, a heavy, performative sound of sheer exhaustion. He reached into his drawer, pulled out a standard company employment contract, and slid it across the polished mahogany wood, right over the top of my meticulously crafted business plan. "I am going to stop you before you embarrass yourself further, Silas," my father said, his voice dripping with intense patronizing pity. "Software is a gimmick. It is a fragile toy that breaks the second the Wi-Fi goes down. I am not wasting $50,000 on invisible fairy dust. You cannot move tons of steel with a computer program." He tapped the employment contract with his thick index finger. "Theron needs a night shift dispatcher," he continued. "Someone to answer the phones, log the manifests, and keep the drivers awake at 3 in the morning. Pays minimum wage, but it is real, honest work. Take the job, Silas. Drop out of that ridiculous school, come back to the real world, and start earning your keep under your brother. If you walk out of this office to chase this ridiculous digital fantasy, do not ever come crying to me for money again. You are entirely on your own." He was using the exact same tactic he always used. He thought the sheer weight of his financial dominance would crush my spirit. He thought poverty would force me to kneel, sign the contract, and spend the rest of my miserable life trapped in a dark dispatch booth, serving the brother who stole my future. I looked at the dispatcher contract. Then I looked at the 30-page business plan sitting beneath it. I reached out, grabbed my binder, and stood up from the heavy leather chair. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw a tantrum. I simply looked my father dead in the eye and said, "You are going to profoundly regret this conversation." Alaric laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Good luck moving fake freight, kid," he mocked. I walked out of the corporate headquarters, the heavy glass doors slamming shut behind me. I walked 2 miles to the bus station in the freezing, relentless rain. My clothes were soaked, my cheap shoes were ruined, and my bank account was practically empty. But as I sat on that cold metal bench waiting for the bus back to Boston, the last lingering shred of childish affection I had for my family died permanently. It was replaced by a cold, surgical determination. I was going to build my empire, and I was going to use their ignorance as the foundation. The next 3 years at the university were a masterclass in sheer, agonizing survival. I was entirely self-funded, grinding through complex engineering and data science courses while drowning in constant, suffocating financial anxiety. Because my father claimed me as a dependent on his massive tax returns to save himself a few $1,000s, I did not qualify for any meaningful financial aid. I was trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare, too rich on paper to get grants, and too poor in reality to buy groceries. There was a brutal stretch during my sophomore year where I survived entirely on cheap instant ramen and the stale dinner rolls the cafeteria threw away at closing time. I worked weekend double shifts at a greasy, poorly lit diner off campus, scrubbing pots and clearing tables until my hands cracked and bled from the harsh industrial dish soap. Every time I plunged my hands into that scalding, greasy water, I thought about Theron driving his luxury cars, paid for by the money that was supposed to secure my future. That anger kept me awake when my body was screaming for sleep. I used it to write code until 4 in the morning every single night. By the end of my junior year, Aeropath was no longer just a concept in a binder. It was a fully functional, highly aggressive software prototype. I just needed a foot in the door to prove it worked in the real world. I secured a final interview for a highly competitive summer internship at a massive, forward-thinking logistics firm based in Chicago. It was the break I desperately needed. The salary alone would have paid my tuition for the final year, and the networking opportunities were priceless. 2 days before my flight to Chicago, the recruiter called me. Her voice was stiff, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. She informed me that they were rescinding the interview invitation. When I pressed her, demanding a reason, she hesitated before admitting that their CEO had received a personal phone call from Alaric. My father had actively reached out to his industry contacts and explicitly told them I was an unstable, unreliable kid who could not be trusted with corporate data. He actively sabotaged my career from hundreds of miles away, just to prove a point. He wanted to starve me out. He wanted me to crawl back to the dispatch booth. I threw my cheap phone across my cramped dorm room, watching it shatter against the cinder block wall. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest, fighting the terrifying, creeping thought that he might have actually won, that I could not beat his massive network of influence. But the universe has a very strange way of balancing the scales. The following week, forced to attend a miserable, low-level startup networking event just for the free sandwiches, my entire trajectory shifted. I was standing in the corner, chewing on dry turkey, when a woman walked directly up to me. Her name was Odelia. She was 32 years old, wearing a razor-sharp tailored suit, and possessed a gaze that felt like it could cut through solid steel. She was a former senior financial analyst who had just quit her toxic corporate job because she was tired of making old, ignorant men wealthy. She had seen a brief summary of Aeropath on a university forum. She did not bother with pleasantries. She looked at my cheap, wrinkled shirt and said, "Your routing algorithm is brilliant, but your monetization strategy is the most pathetic thing I have ever seen. You are pricing this like a student project. This is enterprise software. You are sitting on a gold mine and charging pennies for the dirt." I stared at her, exhausted and incredibly defensive. "And you are going to fix it?" I asked, my voice thick with skepticism. "Yes," Odelia replied smoothly, pulling a sleek tablet from her leather bag. "I am going to restructure your financial model, handle the venture capital vultures, and build the business infrastructure. You focus on making the code flawless. We split equity 60-40. Take it or leave it, college boy." I took it. That handshake in the corner of a depressing hotel ballroom was the birth of a monster. Odelia and I rented a windowless, damp former storage warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. Smelled like mold and old cardboard. We bought cheap folding tables and sat on plastic lawn chairs. We ran thick extension cords across the concrete floor to power our makeshift servers. I slept on a foam mat in the corner, fueled by cheap coffee and pure spite. We waged absolute war against the traditional logistics industry. Odelia was a terrifying force of nature in boardrooms. When we pitched, investors looked at me when I talked about the AI, and they looked at the wall in fear when Odelia aggressively dissected their financial objections. We were an unstoppable machine. But building the tech was only half the battle. We needed a massive corporate client to prove Aeropath could handle heavy, real-world data loads without crashing. We needed someone desperate enough to take a chance on two people operating out of a damp garage. And we found them, right in the heart of my father's territory. Odelia leveraged her deep industry connections to secure us a closed-door meeting with the board of directors of Vanguard Freight, a massive, multi-billion-dollar shipping conglomerate struggling with razor-thin profit margins and a chaotic, outdated supply chain. They were exactly the kind of dinosaur company my father respected. We offered them a high-stakes proposition, a 30-day pilot program integrating Aeropath into their central hub routing systems. If we failed to increase their efficiency by at least 8%, we would walk away with nothing, and they could keep the software architecture for free. If we succeeded, they would sign a massive, 5-year enterprise contract worth tens of millions of dollars. The CEO, a pragmatic man looking for a miracle, agreed to the terms. We deployed the AI. For the first 2 weeks, I monitored the system logs for 20 hours a day, watching the data flow across my screens like a beautiful, complex river. The algorithm was working perfectly, aggressively rerouting trucks around weather delays and predicting maintenance failures before they happened. Efficiency spiked to 11%. We were going to win. Then, on day 18 at 3 in the morning, the system alarms triggered in our windowless warehouse. I bolted upright from my foam mat, spilling cold coffee across the concrete floor. The screens were flashing red. Someone inside Vanguard Freight's network was actively trying to sabotage the routing parameters. They were manually injecting false traffic data and scrambling the GPS coordinates of over 200 active delivery trucks. If the malicious commands executed, it would cause a catastrophic logistical failure, costing Vanguard millions in delayed penalties and utterly destroying our pilot program. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The attack was sophisticated, trying to mask itself as a glitch in my AI's core code. They wanted to make it look like Aeropath was malfunctioning and dangerous. But my code was vastly smarter than whoever was on the other end. I traced the digital footprint in real time, locking down the corrupted nodes and building a firewall around the rogue commands before they could broadcast to the fleet. I pulled the employee ID attached to the sabotage attempt. My blood ran ice cold. The credentials belonged to Kalen, the senior vice president of logistics at Vanguard. He was the very man in charge of overseeing our pilot program. Kalen was a traditionalist, a man who had built his entire career managing dispatchers the old-fashioned way. He realized that if Aeropath succeeded, his massive, bloated department of human dispatchers would become obsolete, and his power would evaporate. He was intentionally trying to stage a catastrophic failure to protect his own job, perfectly willing to ruin his company's profits just to maintain the status quo. He did not realize he was fighting a ghost who had spent years preparing for war. The next morning, Odelia and I walked into the Vanguard headquarters. We did not ask for a meeting. We bypassed the receptionist, walked straight into the CEO's massive glass office, and dropped a thick stack of unalterable, encrypted system logs onto his desk. We showed him exactly how Kalen had tried to cripple the fleet and how Aeropath had autonomously neutralized the threat in less than 4 seconds. We did not just prove our software was efficient. We proved it was a highly secure, incorruptible fortress. The CEO fired Kalin on the spot, having security escort the screaming executive out of the building. An hour later, the CEO signed the massive enterprise contract. That single piece of paper changed the trajectory of the universe. The Vanguard contract was the domino that toppled the rest of the industry. Suddenly, venture capitalists who had ignored our emails were aggressively trying to book meetings with Odelia. We raised our series of funding on our own brutal, uncompromising terms. We moved out of the damp warehouse and into a sprawling, high-tech office space downtown. We hired 50 elite engineers, then 100. By the time I turned 25, Aeropath was valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. I was flying private to meetings in Silicon Valley. But I maintained a fortress of absolute silence regarding my family. I kept the company in stealth mode publicly, operating under holding companies to keep my name out of the early press releases. Every single Sunday, I maintained the agonizing ritual. I picked up my phone and listened to Alaric brag endlessly about Theron. Theron bought a new boat this weekend. Silas. My father would boom through the receiver, his voice dripping with condescension. The boy is a natural leader. The drivers respect him. How is your little computer project going? Still playing around with keyboards in a basement somewhere? I would sit in my massive corner office, looking out at the city skyline, twisting an expensive pen in my fingers, and I would bite the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. It is going fine, Dad, I would reply smoothly, just typing away. I refused to tell him about my success. I knew exactly what he would do. He would immediately attempt to claim it as his own. He would tell his country club friends that his tough love and refusal to fund me was the genius strategy that made me a man. I refused to give him a single ounce of credit. I wanted the reveal to be on a stage so massive, so incredibly public, that he could not spin it or minimize it. We were expanding globally. I was flying private. Yet to my family, I was still the broke kid playing with computers. But a ticking time bomb was set, and my brother Theron was about to accidentally light the fuse that would blow their entire reality to ash. If you are enjoying the story so far, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. The revenge you are about to hear is something they will never forget. To understand why my father chose the exact moment of my graduation to send that vicious text message, we have to rewind the clock just a few weeks prior to the ceremony. I was sitting in my corner office, reviewing the final, incredibly dense legal documents for our upcoming initial public offering, when my personal cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the area code belonged to my hometown in New Jersey. I almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was a desperate vendor or a wrong number, but something told me to answer. When I picked up, I heard a ragged, uneven breathing on the other end, followed by a frantic whisper. It was Vesper. She was Theron's wife, a quiet, observant woman who had always seemed entirely out of place in our loud, aggressive family. Vesper was the watcher, the silent witness to the toxic dynamics that ruled the household. She had locked herself in her master bathroom to make this call, terrified that Theron might hear her over the deafening volume of the sports game playing in their living room. Silas, you need to know what is happening, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Theron is going down, and he is trying to drag you under the bus to save himself. I leaned back in my leather chair, signaling for my assistant to hold all my calls. I told Vesper to take a deep breath and explain everything. Over the next 20 minutes, she unraveled a massive, horrifying web of financial deceit that made my blood run cold. Theron, the golden child, the supposed heir to the massive freight and logistics empire, had been secretly bleeding my father's company dry for the past 2 years. His lavish lifestyle, the new boats, the luxury cars, the endless trips to private islands, they were not funded by his salary or his brilliant management skills. They were funded by gross embezzlement. Theron had been cooking the books, creating fake vendor invoices, and funneling massive amounts of corporate cash into offshore accounts to cover his staggering gambling debts. But the walls were finally closing in. The accounting department was preparing for an end-of-year audit, and Theron was terrified that Alaric would discover the massive gaping hole in the company finances. My father's temper was legendary, and stealing from the family business was the one unforgivable sin. Theron desperately needed a massive distraction. He needed a scapegoat to direct Alaric's dangerous rage away from his own failures. So, during a lavish Sunday family dinner, Theron completely fabricated a malicious, calculated lie about me. He sat at the dining room table, looked my father dead in the eye, and told him that my tech startup had utterly failed. Theron claimed that he had run a background check on me and discovered that I was drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of corporate debt, that I was facing imminent eviction from my apartment, and that I was on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. But the most toxic part of the lie was the motive Theron assigned to my graduation. He told Alaric that the only reason I had invited the family to Boston, the only reason I had paid for their flights and hotels, was because I planned to corner my father in a public setting and beg for a massive financial bailout. Theron claimed I was going to leverage the emotional atmosphere of the graduation to demand my inheritance early, just to keep myself out of a federal courtroom. Alaric swallowed the lie whole. He did not bother to call me and ask for the truth. He did not ask to see my financial statements. He did not even do a basic internet search, which would have immediately revealed the massive media buzz surrounding the upcoming initial public offering of Aeropath. He believed Theron instantly because the lie perfectly validated his own deep-seated biases. It confirmed his arrogant belief that the technology sector was a fragile scam and that I was a pathetic failure who should have just taken the humiliating dispatch job he offered me years ago. He formulated a ruthless, punishing plan. He accepted the expensive plane tickets I bought him without a single word of gratitude. He slept comfortably in the luxury hotel suite I paid for. He took his front row seat, waiting patiently for the exact moment I was physically trapped in the staging area, mere minutes away from walking across the stage. He wanted to strike preemptively. He wanted to cut me off before I could even ask for the imaginary money he thought I so desperately needed. "Thank you, Vesper," I said quietly into the phone, staring out at the Boston skyline. "Are you going to be safe?" "I am packing my bags tomorrow while he is at the warehouse," she replied, her voice breaking. "I just could not let him do this to you, Silas. You were the only one who actually worked for your future." I hung up the phone. I did not feel panic. I did not feel the crushing weight of betrayal. I felt an icy, surgical focus settling over my mind. My father and my brother had spent my entire life trying to bury me in the dirt. But they did not realize that I was a seed, and I had spent the last 8 years growing roots strong enough to crack their concrete foundation to pieces. We are now back in the damp, suffocating staging tunnel beneath the university auditorium. It is the exact moment my father sent the text message. "Do not expect help. You will be begging me soon." I stood in the shadows, the cheap fabric of my graduation gown clinging to my shoulders. The noise of the anxious students around me faded into a dull, meaningless hum. I looked at the live feed monitor. Alaric was still sitting in seat C7, wearing that predatory smirk, utterly convinced he had just asserted his ultimate dominance. He thought he was shutting an iron door on a beggar. He had no idea he was standing at ground zero of a financial nuclear detonation. My encrypted corporate phone vibrated violently in my pocket. I pulled it out and answered, pressing the device hard against my ear to drown out the noise of the commencement coordinator shouting instructions through a megaphone. "Silas," it was Odelia. Her voice, usually a weapon of pure, impenetrable calm, was actually shaking. I could hear a deafening, chaotic roar in the background. It sounded like a massive stadium of people screaming, layered over the frantic clattering of keyboards and ringing bells. It was the trading floor. The financial markets had just opened for the day. "Tell me the numbers, Odelia," I demanded, my voice dropping to an intense, focused whisper. On the other end of the line, hundreds of miles away, my brilliant partner took a deep, shuddering breath. "The institutional buyers tore through the initial block in exactly 14 minutes, she said, her voice cracking with sheer adrenaline. "It is an absolute feeding frenzy, Silas. The retail market just got hold of it. The exchange algorithms are genuinely struggling to keep up with the trade volume. The circuit breakers almost tripped twice in the last 10 minutes. The heavy, damp air of the tunnel seemed to evaporate, replaced by a sudden rushing clarity. The market capitalization, Odelia," I said, leaning against the cold cinder block wall. Give me the final valuation number right now. The offering price was shattered. She practically shouted over the noise of the trading floor. We are currently trading at $94 a share. The company valuation is $2.8 billion. Silas, we did it. You are officially a billionaire. The entire board of directors is popping vintage champagne in the main conference room. You built a global empire from a windowless storage closet, and the entire financial world knows it. I stood there in my $47 rented graduation gown, letting the monumental reality wash over me in massive crashing waves. $2.8 billion. My personal equity stake alone made me wealthier than my father, his father, and every single arrogant executive sitting in the dining room of his exclusive New Jersey country club combined. I did not just beat his precious commercial freight portfolio. I obliterated it from existence. I have to go get my diploma now, I said, a genuine, unburdened smile finally breaking across my face for the first time in my adult life. Go take your victory lap, Silas. Odelia laughed fiercely. I will see you at headquarters tomorrow. We have a massive global empire to run. I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. My fingertips brushed against my personal device, right where my father's cruel text message still sat unread on the screen. The poetic justice of the moment was almost too heavy to carry. He had sent that message to ensure I walked onto the stage feeling like a worthless failure. Instead, he had perfectly timed his own destruction. Graduates, please prepare to march, the coordinator yelled, waving her heavy clipboard. I fell into line. The heavy fabric of the gown no longer felt like a suffocating shroud of academic debt. It felt like armor. I was entirely insulated by the quiet, unshakable power of my own reality. I took a deep breath, stepping forward as the line began to move out of the darkness of the tunnel and into the blinding theatrical lighting of the main auditorium. The transition from the dim tunnel into the massive auditorium was physically jarring. The room was packed to the rafters with thousands of cheering people, flashing cameras, and weeping grandparents. The ambient noise was deafening, a collective roar of pride and anticipation. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead on the wooden podium where the university president and the dean of the engineering department were standing. I knew exactly where my family was sitting in the front row, but I deliberately did not look at them yet. I wanted to draw out the tension until it was almost unbearable. I calculated the distance. It was exactly 43 steps from the edge of the staging area to the center of the stage. 43 steps. I took the first step, my stiff leather dress shoes clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. With every single step I took, the crushing psychological weight of the past 8 years began to evaporate under the bright stage lights. I thought about the freezing winter nights I slept on that cheap foam mat, listening to the rats in the walls of the warehouse. I thought about the endless, torturous Sunday phone calls, biting my lip while my father endlessly praised Theron and mocked my life's work. I thought about the sheer agonizing injustice of having my college funds stolen to pay for my brother's crimes. I was walking across a stage I had almost not made it to, not because of a lack of intellect, but because the sheer crushing weight of financial poverty engineered by my own family had nearly broken my spirit. I had survived an environment explicitly designed to make me fail and crawl back to them on my hands and knees. As I approached the center of the stage, the dean of engineering stepped up to the massive microphone. He held my hard-earned diploma encased in a beautiful dark red leather binder. Silas, Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and Engineering. My name boomed through the massive auditorium speakers, vibrating deep in my chest cavity. This was the moment of undeniable convergence. I reached out and grasped the heavy leather binder, shaking the dean's hand firmly. Congratulations, Mr. Silas. We expect great things from you, he murmured warmly over the applause. Thank you, sir, I replied, my voice steady and incredibly calm. You have no idea. I turned away from the dean, the diploma held firmly in my left hand, and I finally allowed my gaze to drop down from the rafters to the front row. I scanned the sea of faces until I looked directly at seat C7. I thought the worst part of the storm was over when the market opened. I was so incredibly wrong. The true devastation, the catastrophic collapse of my father's reality, was happening right in front of my eyes. The human face is a brutally honest canvas when it experiences a world-ending paradigm shift. When I finally locked eyes with my father from the center of that brilliantly lit stage, he was not looking up at me with a smirk. He was looking straight down at his smartphone, the exact same device he had used to send his cruel text message just 20 minutes prior. I could see the entire scene unfolding in agonizingly clear slow motion. Alaric, the ruthless patriarch who successfully controlled his entire family through constant financial intimidation, was staring frozen at a push notification on his screen. Being a paranoid businessman who obsessively monitored the financial markets, he had his news applications configured to send breaking high-priority market alerts directly to his lock screen. A major financial alert had just pushed through to millions of devices worldwide. The notification headline read, Aeropath IPO shatters records on opening day. 26-year-old founder Silas Mintz tech unicorn status at $2.8 billion valuation. I stood perfectly still and watched the exact millisecond the information fully processed in his aging brain. All the blood instantly evacuated from his cheeks, leaving his skin looking like wet ash. His jaw physically dropped open, falling slack as his breathing hitched in his throat. He stared intensely at the glowing screen, his eyes wide with a mixture of profound confusion and mounting terror. Then his eyes darted violently up to the stage. He looked directly at me, standing tall and holding the diploma. He looked at the massive digital banner glowing above my head. Then he looked frantically back down at his phone, his thick, calloused fingers visibly trembling as he fumbled to unlock the screen to read the full detailed financial article. He was doing the brutal arithmetic in real time. His youngest son's name was currently booming through the speakers, and his youngest son's name was currently dominating the global financial news, explicitly attached to a staggering number that he would never ever see in his entire lifetime of hauling freight. Sitting directly beside him, my mother Corinne was clapping politely, completely oblivious to the nuclear bomb that had just detonated next to her. She was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, unaware that the tectonic plates of her financial security and her family's entire power dynamic had just violently ruptured. I stood in the absolute center of the stage, the flashing strobe bulbs illuminating the massive room. I looked piercingly into my father's terrified, widening eyes. I did not scowl. I did not look angry. I simply smiled. I gave him the exact same smug, closed-mouth, predatory smile he had aimed at the camera when he thought he had ruined my life. I fed his own toxic arrogance right back to him, magnified by billions of dollars of cold, hard leverage. I saw the expression land like a physical blow to his chest. He sank back heavily into his chair. He understood immediately. He realized in a sickening rush that the son he had threatened to disinherit, the son he had openly mocked, had entirely orchestrated this exact moment. He realized he was sitting in a front row seat I had purchased with unlimited corporate money in a city I had conquered without his help. I turned my back on him, walked calmly across the rest of the stage, descended the wooden stairs, and disappeared into the cheering crowd. Thank you so much for watching the story up to this point. If you are still here, please drop a comment with the letter W below. W stands for win, for those of us who refuse to be broken by toxic people. I will be reading and liking every single comment that has a W in it. Now let's get to the aftermath. People always ask me what happened at the celebratory dinner that night. When you watch movies about confronting toxic families, you always expect a massive explosive screaming match. You expect flipped tables, thrown wine glasses, and a dramatic monologue where the protagonist airs every single grievance in a crowded restaurant. But real power does not need to shout. Real power is chillingly, terrifyingly quiet. I had made a reservation months in advance at the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive seafood and steakhouse in the Boston Seaport District. It was a place where elite politicians and tech billionaires dined behind velvet ropes. We sat at a private, dimly lit corner table overlooking the dark water of the harbor. The atmosphere at the table was so incredibly thick with unspoken tension, you could have cut it with a steak knife. My father was a shell of a man. The booming, dominant patriarch was gone, replaced by someone who looked physically shrunken inside his tailored suit. He did not mention the cruel text message he had sent me. He did not mention the IPO. He did not mention the staggering fact that my net worth was now trending on every major social media platform. He was utterly paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his own catastrophic miscalculation. Instead of addressing the massive elephant in the room, he desperately tried to force a sense of normalcy. It was honestly pathetic to watch. He picked up his heavy silver fork, took a small bite of his pan-seared sea bass, and started talking loudly and far too rapidly about Theron's warehouse operations. "We are actually looking at acquiring a new fleet of heavy-duty haulers next month," my father blustered, staring fixedly at his expensive plate, entirely refusing to lift his head and meet my eyes. "The zoning laws for the new depot are a nightmare, but I know the local mayor. We will get it sorted. Real concrete business, you know how it is." He was desperately clinging to his old rusty weapons. He was trying to reassert his dominance by reminding me of the real business world, the tangible things he understood. He was trying to pretend that my massive digital empire did not exist, hoping if he ignored it, the reality would magically go away. My mother, sensing the unnatural terror radiating from her husband, nervously chimed in, talking rapidly about the landscaping committee at their local homeowner association. I did not say a single word. I just sat there in my bespoke suit, slowly eating my perfectly cooked meal, watching them perform their desperate, transparent little play. I let the silence stretch out, heavy, dark, and suffocating. Every time my father paused for breath, expecting me to jump in, the silence crushed him a little more. He was waiting for me to gloat. He was waiting for me to viciously attack him so he could play the victim and call me an ungrateful kid. I denied him that emotional release. I gave him nothing to work with. At the end of the excruciating meal, the waiter approached our table with silent professionalism, holding the heavy leather folio containing the final bill. The total was easily over $4,000. Before the waiter could even set it down, my father reached frantically for his wallet. His movements were jerky, clumsy, and panicked. He desperately needed to pay. He needed to assert his traditional role as the financial provider. He needed to prove to himself that he was still the boss of the table. "I have got it," he muttered, his voice trembling, pulling out his shiny platinum credit card with a shaking hand. I reached out across the table and placed my hand firmly over his wrist. I did not grip it hard, but the implied immovable strength was obvious. He froze instantly, his eyes finally darting up to meet mine. "Put your wallet away, Alaric," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and devoid of emotion. I smoothly withdrew a heavy, solid titanium corporate card from my jacket pocket, a card with no spending limit, bearing the sleek silver logo of Aeropath, and handed it directly to the waiting waiter. The waiter nodded respectfully, ignoring my father's card entirely, and walked away. My father stared blankly at the empty space on the white tablecloth. His hands slowly, defeatedly retreated to his lap. His face contorted into the tortured expression of a proud man trying to formulate an apology, but lacking the basic emotional vocabulary to do so. "Silas," he started, his voice cracking, sounding incredibly small. "I did not know." "Did not know what exactly?" I asked calmly, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. "I did not know what you were building. I did not know it was this big, this real." I set my glass down with a soft clink. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw exactly what he was. A frightened old man terrified of a changing world he could not control. "Yes, you did," I said quietly, leaning forward slightly across the table. "I put the entire comprehensive business plan on your desk 8 years ago. I gave you the math. I gave you the market projections. You knew exactly what I was building." He swallowed hard, entirely unable to look away from my stare. "You just did not believe it was real because you could not hit it with a hammer?" I continued, my voice cold and steady, which I think scared him more than anything else. "You chose Theron's lies over my reality. You chose to protect a thief instead of funding my future. You made your choices, and you made them very clearly." The waiter returned and handed me the receipt. I signed it with a quick flourish, leaving a massive tip, and stood up from the table. I picked up my tailored suit jacket. "The private car is waiting outside at the curb to take you back to the hotel," I said, looking down at my parents. "Your flights home tomorrow are fully paid for. Have a safe trip back to New Jersey." I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting alone in the suffocating silence of their own making. I stepped out into the cool, crisp Boston night air, the street lights reflecting off the dark water of the harbor. For the first time in my entire life, my lungs felt clear. The heavy shadow of my family was permanently gone. The public fallout was spectacular, exceptionally swift, and entirely out of my hands. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy my father's reputation. The undeniable truth did the heavy lifting for me. Exactly 11 days after the IPO went live, a prominent financial journalist named Linus published a massive, highly anticipated weekend feature piece on the incredible rise of Aeropath. The bold headline read, "The Silicon Ghost: How Silas Built a Global Tech Empire in Complete Silence." Linus did not pull any punches in his reporting. He meticulously outlined the brilliance of our threat detection and routing algorithms, but the specific section of the article that truly set my family's world on fire was paragraph 6. Linus wrote, "Unlike many of his affluent peers who lean on established family wealth to launch their startups, Silas built his unicorn entirely self-funded from the ground up. Multiple sources confirm he received zero financial backing from his family's lucrative regional freight empire. In fact, sources indicate his own college savings were repurposed to cover legal liabilities for a sibling." When asked about his family's contribution, Silas declined to comment, stating only that his success was an independent venture. In the tight-knit, hyper-competitive world of commercial freight developers, everyone knew exactly who Alaric was. They knew how he bragged endlessly about Theron. And now, thanks to the most respected financial publication in the country, they knew he had blindly missed out on the biggest financial success his family line would ever see. My father's carefully constructed image of the omnipotent patriarch shattered overnight. His wealthy golf buddies, the men he constantly tried to impress, were suddenly cornering him in the locker room, asking him with barely concealed amusement why he did not invest a few thousand in his own son's massive company. He became a cautionary tale, a laughingstock among his peers. The internal dynamic with my brother imploded just as violently. Due to the intense public humiliation and his own escalating paranoia, Alaric ordered a full, merciless forensic audit of his own company's finances. It took the auditors less than a week to uncover the massive trail of fake invoices and offshore accounts. The exact embezzlement scheme Vesper had warned me about was laid bare on Alaric's mahogany desk. In a fit of blind rage, my father fired Theron on the spot, completely cutting off his emergency funding and threatening him with federal fraud charges if he ever stepped foot on the company property again. Without the constant bailouts, Theron lost his luxury cars, his boats, and his massive house to foreclosure within 6 short months. The empire Alaric had built for his golden child crumbled into dust. The desperate, transparent attempts to crawl back into my good graces began almost immediately. The most telling message arrived from my father on a quiet Sunday afternoon, right around the exact time he used to call me just to mock my tech projects. It read, "Read the article. Proud of you, son. Let us get lunch when you are back in Jersey. We have a lot to catch up on." 3 words. Proud of you. 10 years ago, those words would have moved me to tears. I would have handed him a controlling stake in my company just to feel the warmth of his validation. But sitting there now, a self-made billionaire, I felt nothing but profound indifference. He was not proud of Silas, the son. He was deeply impressed by Silas, the CEO. He wanted access. He wanted to bask in the warm glow of the exact wealth he had tried so hard to deny me. I picked up my phone and typed my reply. I did not start a screaming fight. I simply established a permanent, impenetrable professional boundary. I texted back, "Thank you. I am incredibly busy acquiring a European competitor right now, so lunch will not be possible anytime soon. I will have my assistant send something nice for Mom's birthday. Take care." I hit send. I treated him exactly how he had treated me for years, like a minor, slightly annoying business associate who simply was not important enough to warrant a spot on my busy calendar. I denied him the emotional supply he desperately craved. Today, Aeropath is a massive, unstoppable global operation. We employ over 800 brilliant people across 3 continents. My daily life is filled with the relentless, thrilling pressure of running a publicly traded technology company. The family I have now is a chosen family, built on mutual respect, shared struggles, and the unwavering refusal to ever accept defeat. Odelia is not just my CFO. She is the fiercest ally I could ever ask for. As for my biological family, the distance between us is vast, cold, and permanent. I do not attend the stuffy dinners. I do not engage in the toxic drama of Theron's financial ruins. The greatest inheritance you can ever possibly receive from a toxic parent is the stark realization that you have to build your own empire from scratch. To anyone listening to this story right now who is suffocating under the heavy weight of a toxic family dynamic. To anyone being told that their dreams are childish or that they are not smart enough. You do not need their money. You do not need their conditional love. You do not need to fight for a seat at a table where you are constantly being served disrespect and humiliation. Build your own table. Let your anger sharpen your focus until it cuts through solid glass. When you finally walk across your own stage, do not beg for their apology. Just smile, knowing that you survived them, and step into the brilliant, peaceful life you built with your own 2 hands. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut ties to save yourself or build your success in complete silence? Share your story in the comments below. I would love to read them. And if this story brought you value today, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another video. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.